I think we have to take a different approach than the whole specialized carrier and rig association thing goes. I don't think that our current rules and regulations apply at all. To put together a matrix for us to say, you know, we don't have any regulations and we don't care about this and that stuff, that's not going to do anybody any good. You guys need to put the math together to decide what's needed and what's not needed.
So, okay, so what you're saying
from a Pennsylvania side of things,
sure,
we haven't had any major issues regarding pilot cars as far as accidents goes, crashed bridges, and things like this. So if the institute or the association comes to us and says, hey, we need to raise all these restrictions on pilot cars and things like that, you know, it's a regulation in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
It has to go to, you know, the regulatory commission, and then it goes out and gets vetted by the stakeholders.
Sure.
Well, you're going to get a whole boatload of stakeholders that are going to say, you know, we don't want to raise those regulations. None of my pilot car drivers are certified. They're going to have to. That's going to put an undue burden on them, the small businesses of the world, to do this kind of stuff. So, you know, just from a Pennsylvania, and I'm not speaking for the rest of the region, but we want to see what the National Pilot Car Institute decides.
So you want us to come up with a matrix and kind of, we can do that, you know, as well. We can come back and give something to the regions individually and show each other nationally, you know, because we realize, you know, like in the harmonization effort with SCNRA, that you may not be able to get all 48 states to recognize it, but if you can at least manage it within the regions and start there, yeah, sure, we can definitely do that. And I completely understand. I mean, Wisconsin was the same way. You had a vetting process, and it was very painful. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, the nice thing about Pennsylvania and New York is it keeps a lot of the junker cars out because they're so strict on their policy. When you're taking superloads in, you get a 4-hour inspection, and you get a lot of escorts that won't take work up there because they're like, well, my stuff's not going to pass if they're inspecting anything, so they can pass it off to the next person, and you're getting a better quality of vehicle. And
there needs to be equipment standards and minimums in a lot of these areas, and that doesn't exist.
That's why you're not having some of the
Pennsylvania
issues
does have $1 million insurance.
The insurance requirement alone requires pilot car drivers to have $1 million of insurance, just like the Hawk. So I think that, like you just said, is they're taking those guys right out of the game.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, what you're seeing with those $1 million policies is a lot of the insurance companies, such as Progressive and a couple others, that aren't actually providing pilot car insurance. They're providing $1 million worth of liability coverage.
Yeah, general
but that is it.
liability.
It does not cover you for other incidences outside the vehicle, such as flagging, such as high pole. And you have anybody that has the ability to throw a broomstick on their car and run down the road. Number one, it's not the proper piece of equipment. It's unsafe. But there is nothing written in the laws of the states that require that type of equipment.
Yeah.
There should be minimum standards.
Well, and
I guess that goes back, I'm not disagreeing that we don't need anything. But at the end of the day, when it goes to the legislatures and goes to the commission, they're going to say, why do we need this?
Sure.
Besides the Minnesota bridge going down or the Skagit River in Washington,
integral part
you know,
of that
those
with our association.
one or two massive, you know, issues, you know, what on a daily basis is the issue. And you guys see it out there on the roads, and I know for a fact just because, you know, I've been out there following one of those loads when some fool goes blowing past me and go past him. You know, I understand that's out there, but how and when has that actually caused an accident? When has that crash happened? That's statistical, mathematical. This is what is happening out there. Needs to be fixed.
Sure, we fully understand and appreciate, and that's what I'm helping the association out with, is answering that question for you guys as the regulators or the enforcers and the legislatures that you would talk to about this, or we would talk to about this, is why should you care? You know, I mean, we fully understand that we would have to bring, you know, that to the table and say, this is why this is important and this is why we should, and you may be, you know, New Jersey and Pennsylvania, like you said, I mean, you may not need any changes. We won't know until we cross-tabulate this with your regions.
I would just like to say, can we go to the states and maybe get total number of permits, total number of actual permits that are ran, and find out some statistics? Can we get the cooperation from the states to get that information so we can put together, you know, what works, what doesn't work?
Well, absolutely. In Pennsylvania, we have a right to know law. You just go to the right to know law, ask exactly what you want, and we can dig up those statistics for you. We're required by law to give you those
I
statistics.
think the problem, I know we've looked into this quite a bit, the problem we've had with even obtaining the statistics were whether or not on the official police accident report that's being utilized, whether or not there's a spot to indicate whether or not that truck was an oversized or overdimensional load.
There's-
And that is a big problem with
That's-
a lot of the reporting, is that the data is not consistent.
And CSA is aware of that, and all the state officers are talking about doing it, and because we've tried to pull that data before on other projects I've worked on, and you can't differentiate between whether or not it was a fruit truck or, a super load. It's just commercial vehicle, boom. I was like, how many axles? Give us some indication.
I think what Pennsylvania is saying, I've done a lot of escorts, I like the way their permits are done, but we gotta look at it now from, even in the last 10 years, how many more oversized are moving now?
Right.
And now that one that happened up on 35, the guy that hit the bridge, what about the guy that took out the bridge in Washington? I don't think Pennsylvania has to wait to find out what it's gonna be like. I
Yeah.
think now, because we're hauling so many oversized, we
Yes.
have a lot more up in Canada, and I think this is why it's so important for the rules for everyone to come in, because we don't want another Washington.
Right.
I could
Right.
show you examples of Pennsylvania permits where I find some are very easy to follow, but also where they put specific ramps in there that you're on this state
Yeah,
route.
they do a
for-
good job.
For 2/10 of a mile, it might be an off ramp, but you cannot find State Route 1002 on any map.
Well,
Because
what
it's
I
an
like
off-ramp.
with them is they put the next one to it. So you have two rows, and a lot of people that aren't used to their permits look at it and say, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah, link to
I'm
link.
telling the driver you're supposed to turn left, he said, Al, it's right, stop, let's look at it. So they put two rows down, one is your next turn, and I love that, because you're always prepared for it. So I do appreciate Pennsylvania, and I like the $1 million, and there's a lot of things I really like, but I think we're just waiting for the calm before the storm until we have one. And I think now, when you see so many oversized coming down the road now, and I'm looking even in the last 10 years what has gone, we're gonna have some incidents that are gonna be a lot greater than what we've seen.
I recognize the issue, and believe me, I'm on board with it. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the explaining this to the legislators, explaining it to the commission, these are the things that they're gonna be asking for. And I can't stand up there and say, well, we don't have any statistical record that this is a problem.
And I can understand, it's like the airplane industry, where they tell you how many people have to be killed before they'll make a change. They'll say, okay, it's a money factor. So they look at and say, no, we've only had 85 people killed, we gotta have at least 200 killed, and then we'll do something about it. So,
I don't
but
think that's the
I see
issue
where
in
you're coming
Pennsylvania,
from,
but,
when you go to
you
them.
know, I'm all about changing, but at the end of the day.
You gotta
I
justify it.
I just want to be able to justify those issues, especially when you're trying to make things more restrictive as opposed to less restrictive.
Let me
Sure.
offer a suggestion to you. I'll give you an analogy. 100 years ago, when, maybe it's more
Is
now,
that
when
you,
the
Tom?
old first came out.
Good call.
I'm not that. But you had people putting different types of signs up in different locations, and there was no uniformity, and you had different types of stop signs looking different ways, and they said, hey, traffic engineers evolved, and they said, we need some uniformity here. And they created the manual and uniform traffic control devices. And they live by that today. That's what you guys need.
That's a different
Escort,
conference.
pilot
But-
car, uniform traffic, whatever you call it, guidebook, manual,
Yeah.
that can be adopted, and then the states can refer to that in their regulations and say, must follow the manual on blah, 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 escort requirements.
No, I'm familiar with the METDC, but the same thing, it's like what Matt's saying in Pennsylvania, it is chiseled in stone, you can't change it. Once it's in there, 50 years ago, hey, it was the amber lights, it was good, you can't get it out. Like, that's my only problem with it. I like it in principle, I understand what you're saying, but it's very hard to make changes, like when we asked for signs to be removable so that we can make turns, and they would, oh, God. You know what I mean?
Well, is that some of your stuff in statute, Matt, or regulations, or both, or what?
It's, most of it's in regulation.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would just be a matter of
I can change it, but it's a long, arduous
Yeah.
process.
So you have some of those specifics in regulation.
Yeah, and we're not asking to solve it today. I think what we're asking for is a starting point. And what we're hearing is instead of asking the states to say, okay, come, do your matrix, what you're saying is for us to provide as an association the inverse, provide the matrix to you and say which states we feel don't have adequate laws and could come up to some bar or to some uniform standard across the board. I think one of them, that hits home to a lot of us that do route surveys is that somebody else can send in a route survey or not do it or do it on Google. And we would love to see the states require some way of authenticating that route survey. Now, before you kill me, because yes, I used to be with you on that side of the fence. More administration, more cost, who's going to pay for it? We can get to that. But I think what's important is why should you require this? Why should you require that it be authenticated? Because somebody could say Elton Boyd did this in Texas and Elton's in Maine. But you don't know that Elton didn't do it. But Elton's really good at it because he's a height puller or a high puller. And so you accept it. You're like, oh, okay, this is from Elton. And so I don't know, long-term down the road if there needs to be a national database or some kind of authentication system that's sent in with a electronic signature with PDF or something like that. And why should the states care? Because you protect your infrastructure so that somebody doesn't come down the road and hit your bridge.
I think automation is gonna take care of a lot of that.
I just had a PA survey refused because it didn't have my actual signature on it. It had an Adobe signature, which is actually more secure than my actual personal signature because it's encrypted to my email address.
Yeah. So stuff like that.
And
I
I
mean,
would not accept it based because it had the
Right.
Adobe thing and it wasn't an actual pen signature.
Your comment about automation, let me just give you personal experience. State of Texas does that a great deal. And with particular above certain dimensions, then they require a route inspection. And they'll produce it, and what'll happen is that dispatcher will sign off on that baby and send it back and get a permit. Now the escort and the driver out there are on the ground. We've got a low overpass. And that happens to me, I'm gonna say 3 times. So, there's some process, and it seems to me that anybody can look, okay, we sent the guy this 600-mile route inspection form, and 30 minutes later he sent it back signed. What do you think happened? So, automation is great, but there needs to be some verification process, and frankly, some disciplinary procedures against people that do that.
I mean, the schematics, Pennsylvania has all those clearances in our database. So the permit that was applied for would be analyzed to begin with. So if that load wasn't able to go into that underpass, it was more likely than not because the information wasn't provided adequately, rather than it being the route survey was inaccurate.
Well, if you've got a long wheelbase load that's a little bit tall, they never get in the bottom of the underpass, for example. Your dimensions are, they gave you good dimensions and your dimensions are such, but the practical matter of having a long wheelbase load, they never get in the bottom. So it's effectively 2 feet, the load is effectively 2 feet higher than it is in reality. That's the kind of problem that we see.
Yeah, reverse seesaw, or the pole car clears the overhead light, but the long base load doesn't. The way it tables over crowned roadways, the load could still tap the signal, but the pilot car cleared it. So, there's things
What
like
about,
that.
and that's gonna go back to that particular hauler then never using that surveyor again.
Awesome.
As time goes on, you would think that surveyor would go out of business from using.
Not
No.
necessarily.
Surveyor wasn't wrong.
Yeah,
Surveyor, surveyor, even a high pole.
The surveyor is responsible for knowing the equipment. The surveyor is responsible for not just because he was able to go under with a height pole, but he's responsible for knowing that the equipment that went that was being used could make it underneath that particular load.
But
At the end of
but a lot of
the day,
times,
at the
a
end of the
company
day,
will
she
just
has
give you
no-
the dimensions of the load. They won't actually give you the type of trailer and what they're hauling. They'll tell you it's
We know
so
that.
long, so
I,
tall,
as a
so
state, I
wide.
as a state am gonna say that that would be unacceptable to me. That, because we are expecting the surveyor to understand the equipment that's being used for that.
She has no experience in the poly car industry. She could technically go out, knowing the equipment, knowing the height, knowing the width, throw a high pole on her car, run down the road and certify a survey for you guys, certifying that it's adequate clearances. Meanwhile, she has absolutely no experience, no certification levels, no way to track that.
And that company that hired that person as the surveyor is responsible for that load not making it.
I agree.
At
Some
the
of
end
it,
the
some of
day,
it we
it's
gotta
gonna
police
be
ourselves.
That's
My
a- that's an
insurance is
internal-
get sued if I'm the one that's high polling that load on that survey that she did. My insurance is gonna get tagged. It's not gonna come down on her as the surveyor. It's gonna come down on me as the high pole on that load.
Again, it's, because the hauler is the one that hired that person. That's between you and that surveyor.
Okay, we got a question, I'm sorry.
We got a big problem in Florida right now. They have hired another company to issue the state permits, a private company. In order to save that company from being sued, they have eliminated such things as no longer allowing a survey to be sent in to get the permit. They went to an automated system. I can go on that automated system right now and I can order a permit 18-foot wide, 18-foot high from Jacksonville to Miami, straight down 95. And the computer will automatically issue it to me,
That's the same way New Jersey.
with no
is
verifying
perfect.
whatever. They want to relieve all the responsibility onto the truck driver at that point. And we're getting bridges hit left and right, and it's horrible. I went from doing $5,000-6,000 a month in surveys, to I've done one survey in 3 months. Because they're no longer requiring a survey to be turned in with permit application, and it's all to save this company from being sued for issuing a permit that won't fit. So, that's a step where automation has actually made it worse, not better.
New Jersey has the overhead cleared, so they just check a box and then the permit will spit out.
Yep.
That's a big problem in New Jersey, and I spoke to Senator Kane about that. Anybody can put it in their own routes to get from point A to point B. They're assuming the responsibility, but at the end of the day, it's causing damages within the state.
Well, let me put my old state hat back on. I mean, the state officials have graciously loaned us their time, and I gotta say, I'm feeling like this is getting a little contentious, like it's their fault, like they wrote the law. They did not. They're just merely enforcing
We don't need to be in the
it.
same court on that.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, and so, I don't want them to feel the room like, dude, pilot people. You know what I mean? Like we want to tone it down a little bit and try and work with them. It's not easy. I mean, my forehead has been bloody from being on the inside, beating my head against wall, common sense, and the decision makers that you have to convince will not get it. They'll never get into a car. They won't go out on the road. They don't understand it. So, I don't want to beat up the folks that are on the front line here. I mean, I think if we can convey the message to them that, hey, we want to work with you, bring these issues to light, and if we need to take on the burden of making the matrix, and we need to take on the burden of going to talk to that senator, that may or may not understand what the issue is, then that's, I think, what we're trying to accomplish is how can we help you, or how can you guys help us, achieve these things so it's a win-win. So your infrastructure is protected, so you're getting integrity based in, route surveys, so that automation doesn't remove, the windshield survey can't be replaced. I mean, you go to Google Earth, the bubble car has been by 3 years ago, and something's missed. I had a load in Ted's state that the route surveyor just re-signed the route survey because he cleared it 14 days before, and the load didn't come through because they got hung up in Wisconsin. And I know for a fact the person just reissued it because I checked the dates in the Times. He didn't rerun this, in Ted's state, and unfortunately a line got clipped out of the deal. But that, as Matt, appropriately said, that goes back to the route surveyor. So I think we would concede, if I may say so myself, that there are things that we need to do to self-police. you know, from the pilot car side, and that's, you know, one of the driving factors behind the association is to drive safety, you know, and to lead by example. And if we need to police ourselves, you know, one of the things we want to do is investigate these accidents that happen and find out what's going on, and not get, you know, this stuff on Facebook, you know, or Saget River gets hit and who's in trouble. I mean, that's just, you know what I mean? Just cut through all that and just go right at the issue and figure out what happened, how could it be avoided, and lessons learned, and work with you guys so that everybody gets home safe, like we said, and you know, so the load gets there and no infrastructure gets damaged, and the civilians that you're entrusted to protect by issuing the permit to the carrier that we're all working with and for, that the load gets there and nobody gets hurt.
Right. Ted, did you come?
Yeah, I mean, we're two sides of the same coin. I mean, you guys are here because you're passionate about what you do. You're all about safety. The same thing with SCNRA. I didn't feel contentious. I mean, I don't have any problem with what you guys are saying personally. It's a hot issue. Clearly, recent events has made it even hotter for everybody involved. None of us wants to see our infrastructure get damaged. You don't want to have your loads that you're responsible for get hit or lose your business because of such. There's a lot of issues swirling, and you know, a lot of it. First of all, for Minnesota, I never heard of you guys before.
Yep. No, we're fairly new. We're less than 9 months old.
What I'm saying is that
That's why you're here.
the outreach here has to happen first. We have to understand each other's point of view. And yeah, you're gonna have issues, specific issues, you shouldn't generalize them. But we're here to try to work it out. And,
Sure.
And when a state says that I don't have authority, I tell you what, it wouldn't even get up to my legislative in Minnesota. I would just have to have my management come down and say, how come this carrier's calling me and saying that you're not letting them do X, Y, Z? Well, because we're trying to nail down this pilot, or whatever it is. And they
Right.
say, hey, move that damn load. So there's a lot of things like that we have to understand each other's business a little more.
Yeah.
The fact that you guys have this is awesome. You know, what you talked about here in your talking points, I think is great. Right along? Yeah, I've never been in a pilot car. I supervise 10 people issuing permits. A lot of different backgrounds. Some have had trucking experience. I try to get those when I can. So a lot of it is just awareness. It's gonna take some time. But just having you guys, honestly, from my perspective, when we write a permit, like I think what Matt is saying is it's not our responsibility to know who's the pilot. As the state, even though we're issuing a permit, we're looking at it as the permittee is the carrier, the hauler. It might be a crappy system, I get it, you know, it's been like that for decades. Not saying we can't fix it as best as we can. Coming up with a matrix right off the bat, to me, sounds a little too premature, to be honest, because I really don't want to hear from you to say, here's what we want, and then it might stall conversation. The outreach piece to me is the most important, to understand both are. So we might have, as regions, more work to do to say, here's some of our issues that we have as state agencies. Some are more restrictive than others.
Sure.
I have very little statutory authority. Most of my stuff is policy.
Right.
So, but not understanding where you guys come from specifically probably hurts us more than anything else.